So I think I always apply the 80-20 rule to this, as in lots of things in life, in that I think wherever you go, 80% of the topics people are talking about are roughly the same. That they mean roughly the same things. According to how mature that market is, so if you're in somewhere like, let's say, Brno, or Prague, compared with if you're in London or New York, or if you're in Auckland or wherever you are, that conversation might look a bit different, really set up by the infrastructure, the history, and things like the technology available and so on, availability of talent. But generally, it's really about, in recruiting, it's about attraction, employer brand, shortage of talent in some areas, some technology. How do you create the right kind of career site, website? What tools should you use? But the conversation is roughly the same, according to wherever you are. When the contrast to that is the 20%, which is local, and the local is really that bit about why would hiring in Istanbul, what would employer brand look like, say, in Istanbul compared with in New York, which is going to be very set by very local domestic things like the availability of talent. You get variances in different locations, geography sometimes, how people can move about. You go somewhere like South Africa, you might have something like a history or a local legal complication, like something like needing to employ a certain number of people from a previous disadvantaged community. You might then go somewhere like Germany, where you've got some very specific data and cultural regulations. So I think the conversation is very similar. The bit I'm always interested in is that 20% that says culturally we do things this way. This is the available. The thing that really sticks out in my mind when we talk about this is when I spoke at a conference in Johannesburg 7-8 years ago, first time. Somebody came up to me from Nando's, which is a well-known brand in the UK, but very big brand in South Africa, but more of actually a takeaway chicken venue. They came to me and said, look, we have 7,000 employees in South Africa. I think it was something like 7,000. We love everything you're saying, but of those 7,000, only 1,000 are on the internet. So how do we deliver the same principles of employer branding and reach and connection with people, but in a manual rather than a digital way? Which really challenges us to go away and think again. Because, I think if you are in the UK or if they're in the US, you don't really think about the fact that the majority of the workforce might not have the internet as a basic thing. So I think when you go locally, you learn lots of things. I went somewhere, I remember the first time I went to Brno, and talked about problems of high volumes of people applying and this kind of stuff, very much what we were seeing in EMEA at the time. And the response that I got back from that was really, actually, we only have 2% unemployment and people don't leave their jobs. So what you assume will be an issue, you need to get local to get underneath it. And that's why I love to travel. No, that's really something that's really damaging to talent acquisition. I think the more that people within talent acquisition and recruiting talk about not being an HR function, the more that holds back the progress of what talent acquisition is becoming. Right, so really it's a silo within HR. It's a silo that we've created. But ultimately we deal with humans as the resource of a business. At the supply chain level, so they're bringing people into a business. So why we would think within recruiting that we're not HR is kind of crazy for me as a concept. And I understand that people say, well, maybe we should report into marketing because recruitment is more marketing, all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, I think there's two things that really stand out on this that I think within talent acquisition we've created this problem for ourselves. One is that you see very few. I can think of probably a handful in a 30-year career of people who've gone from being heads of TA, directors of TA, to being CHROs, which is ultimately the board seat. If you are a CHRO, you're more likely to be seat at the table, if you want to call it that. But that's really where the authority and control of budget comes from. So generally, when you look at a TA career, that will peak at a head of, director, VP, whatever it might be called in the organisation, at that level, when there's another level above that of the CHRO. So it's very rare that you see someone from talent acquisition go into that board. It's more often an HR generalist or someone from a different discipline. So it's very rare that you see the silos within HR do it. So it's very rare that you'd see a head of TA and almost parallel L&D, learning and development. You very rarely see an L&D person join the board. Now, my view on that is, if I look at the future of what we're trying to build in recruiting and talent acquisition, there's a few things that really stand out, I think are important in this conversation. One is that the future that I see is possibly even a recruiting function that doesn't exist as a recruiting function that does something new, still really involved in the same front end. So I see talent acquisition and learning development as a single function. That's what I've been working towards strategically with some of the customers that I work with. I think the majority of employer brand is really job brand, and the attraction lies in learning content. What can I learn from this organisation? How can you showcase the talent and the ability and the knowledge that you have within an organisation? You do that through learning content. The nurture is through learning content. How do you keep people connected? The more that we bring in things like internal mobility into talent acquisition, you're not far away then from career development, because not only are you identifying for people for roles, but you're identifying skill gaps and all that kind of thing. So I see learning and development TA as a single function. And I think once we get that and move away from trying to think, oh, well, we're not HR, we'd be better off reporting to marketing or doing something different. Once we accept 100% our role in the HR ecosystem and start to look to join up the pieces of the HR ecosystem and move more people through to CHROs. Sometimes that might mean that talent acquisition isn't a specialisation that you work in for the whole of your career. It might be part of a portfolio career where you go and do some years in talent acquisition, you do some years in L&D. And we've really seen this evolve from companies that have built in reverse. So from startup companies that have gone through growth, generally HR, recruiting, learning, culture has all been put in one basket because it's been a small business. One person's driven that. And that's where and in the beginning of that business, the major growth bit has been the recruiting bit. Bring people in, build a culture around it, do some systems, set up some learning for them, employee engagement, look at their day-to-day welfare. So I think we're going to see more. I think we're going to see more of that on scale. So until we fully embrace ourselves as HR and wear the I Love HR badge, we're not going to progress the TA function. There's lots of different ways of answering that question, really. But if we're looking at what the biggest thing is today, I think there's 4 trends that really are standing out, which I think are impacting the way that we're working. The first one is length of service in an organisation is shrinking significantly. It's currently running globally on about 2.6 years with an organisation, and that's going down by 4 to 5 months each year that we're taking a measure on this. So what that means is organisations, even those that might keep the same headcount, if you have a headcount of 1,000, you're going to be hiring more people this year than you did last year, because headcount shrinking. Same time background to that, talent acquisition teams aren't growing significantly as a trend. If anything, they're shrinking through more adoption of technology. So individual recruiters are handling higher volumes of hiring than they've ever done before. So I think that's the first key trend. Also, that means this concept or notion of active and passive candidates is no longer a thing, because I look at it as passive in that people are always in a state of readiness to move. That state of readiness increases, but right from when you get a job, you're thinking about another job. Which brings me on to the second trend, which is the way in which people are looking at jobs. So what we're seeing is a lot more, this is a really key thing around branding, we're seeing a lot more where candidates are applying for 8 times more jobs than they ever did before. They're doing it on quite a simple criteria, which is salary, location, job title, disqualifiers. And they're putting very little time into that selection. So they're not going away and consuming lots of content in the way they have done in the past, or following particular brands. So it'd be easy from that point of view to say, well then, should we even think about employer brand? Because really it's a transactional thing, there's limited information, it's advertising, point of sale stuff of, I see an ad, it's interesting, I apply. And I'm applying for a lot more jobs. But actually, when we look at the digital activity, which we can measure now, which is what do the candidates do, they're all over and consuming more content than ever before. They're just consuming it post-apply. And there's a lot of reasons for this. One is they're expecting not to hear from you when they apply for a job. So they're expecting not to hear back. And they're also thinking, well, the time that you're going to spend reviewing their application is going to be seconds or a few minutes. Why should they put more time than that into the application process? And we've also made it easier to apply, one-click apply and all this kind of technical stuff. We made it easier to do that. We made it less arduous. So what we've created is significant, which brings us to the next trend, increases in applications and declining relevance in those applications. So the way in which people are looking at jobs now is very granular on the job rather than the brand. So I consider that to be job brand as being an important big issue for us to say, right, okay, if I'm delivering employer brand through job, how do I deliver content and connection which is relative to this job? Because the way in which you're looking at a job and deciding whether to apply or not is actually considering what your next job is going to be. So how is this going to make me more employable? This kind of psychology around, maybe it's just, if I go and work for a good brand and I stay there for 2 or 3 years, that's going to look great on my CV. I'm going to be a really desirable employee. In particular, it's people. This is where the learning and development, the learning content comes in. What am I going to learn? Am I going to acquire a new skill? Am I going to work on something which might make me famous in the marketplace because of the project that I'm working on? Is the work going to be interesting? So we're looking at jobs in terms of what our next job is going to be, and probably with a different organisation. So that's changed the whole way in which we attract people, and the way in which we communicate brand is through the lens of the job. And actually, if you think about the traditional funnel, if you were drawing it out as a funnel, 80% of our work historically has been in attraction and branding and connection and follow us and get our newsletters and all that kind of stuff. So we've provided all the content up here. All the brand stuff has been up here, really about attraction. Can we attract you to the company? And then once you're attracted to the company, can we attract you to the job? And will you apply for this particular opportunity? What we're seeing as a contrast to that is now we need to be increasing the content and the connection and the nurture post-apply, not pre-apply. Whereas we have systems built entirely for pre-apply. And I think that's the big trend that we need to be looking at right now. So I was working with Olio, who's quite a big ATS provider, and we tracked the data for 7 million candidates, 7 million applicants, really, 7 million people who'd applied for jobs. And there was a number of things I was interested in. We also looked at that across 4 continents. So EMEA, APAC, India, Sub-Asia, Europe, Americas, and Latin America, to see if actually were the trends different, because we hear quite often it's not quite like that in Latin America, or it's not quite that in Russia or wherever you might be. So the first one was to see, is there any difference in the trends? And the only difference we could find really was dictated by availability of talent. So it wasn't that the ratios were different, it was the availability. The second one was, the thing I was really interested in is if the behaviours or findings when people got into the funnel were any different. If we looked at the numbers, were the rejection rates any different? And if we looked at professional services versus retail versus technology, all the different areas where people in those disciplines would say, oh yeah, but hiring for a retail unit or hiring for a distribution company is different to hiring for a management consultancy or whatever it was. So I wanted to look at, so we also equally looked across about 10 different industry sectors conflicting. And I wanted to look at those numbers and say, is there a difference between geography and location? Generally, we found there wasn't actually. The ratios were roughly the same. The volumes were different according to availability. So if you're hiring in retail, you might be talking in thousands of applicants versus if you're hiring in technology, you might be talking about tens of applicants. But the ratios generally of whether it was 3-1 in a rejection funnel or 20% was about right. The really striking number in this was only of 7 million candidates, it's less than 1% who actually reach the very first action in the funnel. Think about that in number terms. So you've got 7 million people applying, there's only 1% who end up in the funnel in any way, once they've gone through the first level of selection or assessment or whatever it is. And this comes back to the point that the candidates are applying for more jobs than ever before. If you go to any of the job boards or anything else, you're finding the traffic is increasing significantly. So what this is showing us is, one is to deal with the volume in a way that provides the consumer experience in candidate experience, which companies are really aspiring to achieve. To deal with the volume and to deal with the process, then we conversely need to deal with, we need automation, because you physically can't reply to 6.5 million candidates who are being rejected in that process. And you need a high volume, high speed way of doing things like communicating with people, telling them what the next step is, dealing with them in the right way. That's why we're seeing things like chatbots and assessment and machine learning really coming into play to deal with the top of the funnel bit. And the other thing that we learned from that is that we really need to look at how we automate the whole of the top of the funnel, including attraction, outreach, identification of people, and all the things we can do in that, because where we need to be spending recruiter time, and if you think about the job brand and people applying for a job and wanting more content and more of a concierge experience as they go through the funnel and needing more of a relationship to choose one brand over another because they're probably interviewing with multiple employers of a similar job, is we're looking at how we shift the human experience and the interaction to being very personalised, very one-to-one, with less people with a greater degree of relevance. So that's really what we took away from that. Was we're in the rejection business, we're rejecting 99.8% of the people who are applying. We're not very good at attraction because not more people. Most of the people applying to us are never going to be considered. So we're setting up a bad experience from the get-go, really, and to deal with the volume. So we've got to think about how do we attract, and should we actually be connecting people with companies and inviting them to apply? Should the relationship be longer term? Should we connect in a different way? And that's particularly where I'm looking around learning content as the means of maintaining nurture and connection. So all these kind of things come into that research and looking at it and saying, actually, two things. One is we're not very good at most of the stuff we're doing. We're failing in our objective. The other one is that we're going to need to work and develop more technology at the top of the funnel so we can spend more of our time and resources deeper in the funnel with smaller volumes of people. And we need to be working on relevance, not volume, because we don't have a volume problem. There's not a war for talent. There's a finding problem. We've got to really work on that. Well, the question is, why don't we actually repel people? And to some degree, we do through honesty. It's quite a difficult thing to achieve. I've achieved it with some of the brands that I've worked with, but where you need to present the negative as well as the positive, and people are not used to truthful storytelling.
Yeah.
Whatever they say. So, and here's the reality. The way and this is part of the thinking that we need to get ourselves around, particularly in the branding or talent acquisition industry, is the way in which people choose jobs. The way in which people choose jobs is very much like voting. Very much like voting. You're not choosing. If I go out and vote, most of us are not voting because we really believe in what we're voting for. We're voting because we believe one option is not going to be as bad as the other option, which is the least painful experience, right? So when you think about that from a branding point of view, from a job point of view, really, we're not wired as humans to go work every day. We're culturally brought up that we need to do that, and we have a capitalist necessity to go and do that in order to, first of all, survive, eat, pay rent and all that kind of thing, and then to get as much reward as we can for the effort that we're putting in, right? That's the way in which we're wired. But we equally know that the trade-off in a job, when I go for a job, is I will trade off the things I don't enjoy for the things that I do enjoy or take a personal reward from. What I'm wanting to balance when I'm looking at a job opportunity or when I'm going through a career is what's the pain I'm going to have to suffer to get this reward. Now, what we concentrate our storytelling and our branding on is the reward. Look at all this good stuff. Look how great we are. Look how excellent we are at this. Look at this person and all the things they've achieved. Whereas what someone looking at a job and considering whether to apply for or going through their career is, tell me the pain. What are the things I'm going to have to put up with? So I'll give you a very real example of this. One organisation that I worked with, we did some 1 minute videos, 30 seconds on what you love about your job, 30 seconds about what you hate about your job. We actually ended up only publishing the stuff people hated. And we put it on the ATS attached to jobs, which was kind of interesting. And the first set of people we talked to, because they had a turnover issue and they couldn't figure out what it was. So we went out and talked to the first group of people. We did it in the usual focus group that I do. I took a budget of, I think, 500 quid and took 20 new starters to the pub and had a drink with them. And I asked them some questions while we were in the pub environment, and I produced a very good demographic report with some graphs and pie charts and stuff. But generally speaking, what we were interested in is just tell us the reasons you joined. Why are you here? What's exciting about this place? And we got all this kind of stuff like fast moving, top of the range products, really exciting environment, all the rest of it. We then took a whole group of people who'd been there 6 months, and because they'd been there 6 months, we went and said same thing, took them to the pub, asked them the same questions, which is, how are you finding it? What's going on? What do you think the organisation is? And they said to us, it's slow, it's bureaucratic, it's really difficult to get anything done and all this kind of stuff. So we're very easily able to look at the turnover problem and say, well, look, we're presenting this as an image, and there's a bit of truth in some of that, and they're finding this. So naturally, the net result is disappointment and turnover. I compare it to having a hotel and spending all your money on the lobby and nothing on the room. So people walk into a fantastic lobby, their anticipation is this is going to be a great experience, and then the rooms look a bit ropey. Whereas if you do it the other way around and spend the money on the rooms and not a lot on the lobby, once people have got over the door, you're exceeding their expectation, not under exceeding it, right? So that becomes our branding challenge: is how do we tell the truth? So this same organisation, when I presented this to them in a very graphic way, came back and said, yeah, but if we go out in the market, if we tell a story in the market that we're slow and we're bureaucratic and it's very frustrating, all this kind of stuff, nobody's going to want to come and work here. So they let me do it in one particular area of technology where they're having massive problems hiring. They kind of, well, nothing to lose, we'll let you do that, which is very often a lot of the work that I do is in, it's experimental, it's challenging, and it's in, okay, we'll let you do this in this area because we're not getting any candidates anyway, so nothing to lose. We went out and did it. We told the story everywhere that it was slow, bureaucratic, took time to get stuff done. You can always find stories that counter that are genuine. You don't need to make this stuff up. I remember this particular example. I remember one developer saying, it's slow, it's bureaucratic, it's really frustrating, but if you get something done here, it'll make you famous. That's kind of like, you couldn't script that kind of nugget that you get from people. And you get a lot of that with video content, or natural video content if you stage it in the right way. And so we took that content and then presented it in that way to people, and suddenly we changed in that a lot of the people applying to join completely changed. The dynamic of developers completely changed because it went from people turning up for this, wanting this fast moving environment that was very dynamic and all this kind of stuff, to people who, developers who've been working in startups who said, look, I'm working for a startup, I'm having to put code out that I know doesn't work, I'm having to do things, it's bad for my reputation. I actually want to go somewhere that's a bit slower. Or other people who are saying, I actually want that challenge. I want to have to break through that bureaucracy or change stuff or smash it up. I want to go and do that, right? And I can relate to that very much. I really enjoy working in very corporate environments because it's the work that I enjoy is going in, smashing some of those myths and challenging some of those perceptions. So there was a whole lot of people out there who went, yeah, that's exactly what I want. So they managed to be much more successful both in terms of hiring and retention by telling the truth, by going out and saying something which, with a marketing head, is almost counterintuitive. If we go out and show that we're just honest with people about, yeah, it can be frustrating here, it can be bureaucratic. That comes down to, particularly from a branding perspective, understanding this, that the story is really not important. The credibility lies with the teller, who's telling it. If I, as a recruiter, am telling a story or creating content or making brand, that's only credible with other recruiters. That's not credible with other people outside of that, because that's seen as an advert or a shop front. If I'm a developer, I want to talk to developer. If I'm going to be a receptionist or work in a lobby, I want to talk to someone else who works in the lobby and say, what's it like here? How busy does it get? What are the people like? Are the people okay with you? When the directors come in, do they give you... All these kind of dynamics which come from peer-to-peer connection and conversation, which tell you, I have no idea. If I go into a restaurant, I remember working with Hard Rock Cafe way back when on branding and things, when branding was really a new concept. One of the things we went out was kind of said, yeah, I can't relate the story of being a kitchen porter, probably English as a second language, who has to start a shift at 4 a.m. and go and carry giant sacks around, that kind of stuff. I can't relate that in terms of what's good and exciting about that, or what's bad about that, or what are the things you need to know before you accept this take this job. This is the stuff you need to know. But another kitchen porter can tell that story really well. So it's my job in recruiting, in talent acquisition, in employer brand, my mind is mobilising, not managing. How do I mobilise those stories and create an environment where people can tell the truth to each other without fear of some kind of punishment or penalty? People can tell the truth to each other. So the people who choose opportunities are people who understand everything and are genuinely interested in that process. I think we just spend the money in the wrong places, and in the wrong way in lots of ways. So most of our money and investment is top of the funnel. It's top of the funnel. It really is attraction. It's how do we get people to apply? How do we get people to do stuff? When actually, now that we can automate more of that, I think the other point that really stands out where we wasted a lot of money is we've misunderstood what I call the talent tipping point. The talent tipping point is right. We look at people being more mobile now. Every 2.6 years they're changing jobs a lot more. It used to be when people stayed with organisations longer. Once they were past that transaction of applying for a job, if they went to work for somebody else, they were going to be inaccessible to you for 5 or 10 years. Until they re-entered the job market unless they got fired, right? Because a CV would consist of 3 or 4 companies, generally speaking. So we built hiring to be very transactional, which is, here's a job, apply. You get it, you don't get it. If you don't get it, then we forget you. We just keep your detail for legal reasons for as long as we do. What we've learned is there has to be a point in the disciplines when we're hiring for similar skill sets, even if job titles are changing, we're hiring in similar job families or skill sets repeatedly, almost continuously throughout the year. The talent tipping point is the point where you go, do we need any more people? If we've got 1 million CVs in our database, which was very real with one of the customers I worked with, we've got 100,000 CVs of people who've applied before for developer roles or for whatever it is. We know a bit about their skill sets and we know about what they do. Do we actually need any more people? Or do we need to have relationships with the people that we have? So I think that's the change in our thinking is, and it is a real number for me. I'm going to say, right, at what point do we have enough, do we know enough people that we don't need to know any more people? Now we might do, hopefully our branding activity will continually top that up as some people drop off the bottom, but we need to be thinking about retention of relationship rather than retention of employment. So if you're a candidate, how do I maintain a relationship with you forever? This isn't any different to e-commerce. I did this in Bank of Ireland when I came in and presented it as a very new concept. Actually, we didn't need to attract anyone anymore. We had enough people. And that there would always be a natural attraction of people looking at our stuff. Now, it might have been that we needed to change the dynamic of that because we thought, actually, because of our brand or our position, the diversity isn't quite right, so we're not getting the right balance in supply chain. We need to do some different targeting in that. Sometimes the change that we needed to make in our attraction was either diversity or image. It was also diversity of trades to say, right, a bank is not a bank anymore, it's actually a technology company, so how do you get people to apply to a bank instead of applying to Google? We've had to deal with that challenge a bit, but generally speaking, well, you know what, we know all the people we need to know. We just don't know anything about them. We knew about them at that one point in time when they applied for that one job. So how do we reconnect with these people? How do we find out about them? How do we find out what they're motivated by? How do we give them a reason to stay connected with us when they're not looking for a job? Which is really where the learning content comes in, right? So I think increasingly it's not a case of wasting or saving money, it's a case of shifting where you spend. It's a very easy transactional process that can deal with people when it's right. Do that in a very automated way in terms of the attraction, the outreach, make it very personalised and very personalised targeting. There's a lot of stuff we can learn in that particular marketplace. But once you're connected with someone, figure out how do we stay connected with you, with the things that you're interested in, so that when we do have opportunities for you, or we do need some more information off you, we do need to get you updated, you're actually going to respond with us. So retention of those relationships and seeing people as people rather than people as data makes a world of difference. There's a whole load of aspects to that. The first one is just the honesty. I think that's the first thing that I look at if I'm doing a diagnostic operation, which is what's the message versus what's the reality and what's the gap. And when you have a big retention problem, that's usually because the message and the reality is something different. So I'll give you a really simple example. One organisation I worked with in London, they went, yeah, we interview all of our trainees, graduate entry, we interview them all in head office. Why do you interview them all in head office? Oh, because that's the best office, it's fantastic, it's got the best view, best facilities, best in the Docklands, best of everything. Where are they going to work? Most of them in our Manchester office or wherever. Why don't you interview them in Manchester then? Oh, well, it doesn't create the right impression. Okay, so their first day at work, you're going to disappoint them. There's a reality in that, right? In terms of, from the very first day of work, you're turning up and going, oh, I thought I was going to have like this glass office overlooking the river, and now I've got this pod overlooking a shopping centre. I'm like, what's the deal? This isn't what I signed up for. So I think in the beginning is that reality. The other one is we have to ask questions and say, is retention of employment important? And I challenge that it's not. I challenge that retention of employment is generally a measure of how bad we are at sacking people who can't perform. So there's a lot to be said for turnover, positive turnover. There's a lot to be said for people staying engaged and motivated in the work that they're doing. There's a lot to be said of if we look permanently at retention of relationship, that then brings in things like internal mobility and our internal market and all this kind of good stuff and our attitudes to that. But retention of relationship is going to be the key. You're going to keep recommending us, you're going to keep opening stuff, you're going to keep talking to us, keep feeling positive about us as an organisation when we take away that when you work for us you have an essential need for connection, which is you want to pick up a paycheck and you want to do the things that you need to do. When you don't work for us, you have no reason to be connected with us. So the retention of the relationship, and how do we have a relationship with you in which we're engaged, whether you're an employee or not an employee, whether you're an alumni, whether you're someone who's applied or chosen to connect with us, the difference between candidates and applicants really, which I think is fundamental to this. Candidates are people who choose to connect with you. Applicants are people who are applying and being measured against the job. And you need a different attitude and outlook. I think once we start accepting those principles, then we can begin to build retention. Employer brand, who's employer brand for? It's for everyone, for me, and it's not something you can manage. Something you can amplify in a realistic way, but it is what it is. You know, people go out to me and say, how do we have a good employer brand? So I can tell you that really simply, be a good company. You're a good employer, you're going to get a good employer brand. I think the other principle we have to get to is there's no such thing as a bad culture, there's just a bad culture fit. People argue with me when they make that point. They go, yeah, but Bill, there's septic cultures. I go, yeah, there are septic cultures, but then there's septic people who actually love that culture, right? Who love that, whatever that culture might represent. So I think we need to get a reality of understanding where people are. One of the main areas I think we need to really challenge is, particularly in employer brand, this is a massive misnomer, and this is where I think people make lots of mistakes, is we make more generalisations around generations and what they're going to want than we do at any other group of people. We would never take a subset of people and describe them in a way that we would, say we were looking at LGBTQI plus community, we would never say all of these people want this or are motivated by this or want to be managed by this because they like this. Once we get into the age bracket saying, oh, this person's Gen Y, this person's Gen Z, this person's Gen X, that's where we go, right, so they want this, they don't want this, they don't want to be connected. We need to throw all of that kind of generational thinking away and look at it and say, actually, some of our conventional wisdom around generations is completely reversed. The latest one I'm causing quite a lot of controversy about is when we talk about Gen Y or Gen Z, when people are talking about Gen Y or Gen Z, something we hear lots of people talking about is purpose. Again, young people in the workforce, they want purpose, they want this, they want that. There's no reality in that. There's no reality in that when you get out there. And how I challenge this is, I've worked with cigarette companies, I've worked with armaments companies, I've worked with I've looked at, ran an event where we had the head of recruiting for Goldman Sachs who was talking about graduate recruiting at Goldman Sachs, who would say actually during the financial crisis you would think when you compared our brand nobody would apply for us. Actually, we've never had more people apply to come work for us at Goldman Sachs than during the financial crisis. Young people. Exactly the same as brands like BP when there was the oil spill in North America. A friend of mine ran employer branding in North America for BP. The day after there was one of the biggest oil spills in history, wrecked the coastline. So you'd think no young people want to go and work for those companies, and yet they have record applications. Cigarette companies whose mission is to kill people, just slowly, record numbers of applications, right? So you go, so how can this be? Because I'm reading and I'm hearing and I'm seeing all this wisdom from different people saying it's all about purpose, it's all about purpose. Then you go and talk to young people and say, right, what is it you really want? And they go, money. You know, why do you want money? It's because this is a generation of student debt. So there's restricted opportunities in terms of what people can do at graduate level, and there's a high level of debt, in which they go, whoever's going to pay me the most money for the least painful contribution is going to get my labour for 4 or 5 years. So what we find is the opposite end of the scale when we talk about purpose. Go and talk to people who might be 30 or 40 later in their careers, who recognise that they are in demand. They have choice. They can choose between multiple employers. They can decide what they do. That's the people who the textbooks would tell us are not driven by purpose, who are massively driven by purpose, because they're going, well, actually, I could take 4 or 5 jobs, so which one do I want to do? Which one would I be proud of? So I think we need to challenge our conventional wisdom and say most of what we hear isn't true. Show me the data, show me the numbers behind that, and once we do that, get rid of the generational thinking and all that kind of stuff. That's when we start to be really effective in our activities, but challenge what we think is conventional wisdom. Well, I think, and I always still do a bit of recruitment actually, although most of it's from a strategic end, but I put together maybe 20, 25 hires a year for customers I'm working with in some strategic positions. So I do still recruit. That doesn't stop. What would you do differently? I wouldn't actually do anything differently, because the way in which we work and the way in which we think is an evolution. So things that I might have stood at conferences and talked to you about and been very passionate about, let's say 2 years ago, 3 years ago, at that time in the market, or at that time with people, or at that time in terms of technology, would have been best advice, right? Would be great advice. If you did the same, if you followed that advice today, compared to what I talked to you about 3 years ago, or what I wrote in a book 3 years ago, whatever it was, it could be dated and ineffective, because people are agile, people move. And we think organisations are agile. They're not, because in any organisation, and if you want to change the way that you work, the way that you attract, the technology that you use, your thinking, you probably have to go through 7 levels of permission, thinking with vulnerable, right? So if you want to change technology, or you want to change methodology, you want to change what you do, it's going to take months or years to get it done. Real typical is when we see people buying technology, there's usually a 1 to 2 year process between selection and actual implementation, actually using in anger. So by the time that technology is deployed, it's usually old-fashioned because tech's shifted. But it takes 2 years to get it in, the buying, the security, the clearance, the sign off, the panels of procurement, the planning, all this kind of stuff. That's a big problem. People are agile. If I wake up tomorrow and think, yeah, I don't want to do this, I want to do that, I can just do it. I don't have to ask permission. So we're always playing catch up with the people. So to say, would you do anything any different? No, I wouldn't do anything any different. But the things I do today might be very different to the things I did yesterday. I've got more data available now. I've got more technology. I've got more things that machine learning is beginning to develop to the point where, and this is why I love the Unleash series of events, right? Because I do Unleash and I do, beginning of the year I do the London event, and then I do a Vegas event, and then towards the end of the year I do a Paris or Amsterdam event, depending where it is. And I always find beginning of the year we're talking about concepts mostly. This is what we're excited about, this is what we're working on this year, this is what's happening. Vegas is a check-in on that, right? These are the early lessons, this is what we're finding. By the time we get to Paris, it's people saying, right, this is what we found this year, this is the big lessons, this is what we're going to carry over into next year, this is what we started thinking about, these are the issues. So I think when you look at that, the answer is I'm a big believer in test-backed practice, not best practice. The fact that someone's done something before and it's worked before means there are lessons you can take away from that. Doesn't mean it's going to work for you because the market may have shifted. Best practice case studies tend to be history lessons. At this period of time, this worked. I still have people ask me about how I hired for Hard Rock Cafe 9 years ago, something that made me pretty famous. We opened stores, we had 125 people in 2 weeks, end-to-end in Facebook, right? That got me on the map. That particular piece of work won a lot of awards. And people still ask me about that, say, what can we learn from that? Go, well, for a start, most of the technology methodology you couldn't do now. You couldn't replicate that tomorrow. There are things you could learn from that, but there's nothing you can replicate. So to say that case study is relevant, yeah, it's relevant, but what it should really teach you is test practice, not best practice. Go and do something different. Challenge things. So what would I do differently? Nothing. Actually, nothing in terms of recruiting, other than making sure I'm relevant for the time and for the day.